All right, welcome to another exciting episode of the Build Your A-Team podcast. In season 2, we'll be sharpening our focus to share how veteran entrepreneurs and business leaders have built exceptional teams, uncovering whether their success comes from strategic analysis, intuition, or just pure luck. Today, we have the privilege of welcoming Chris Anthony, a powerhouse in the world of entrepreneurship. During his military career, Chris served in both the 75th Ranger Regiment, 10th Special Forces Group, and also the intelligence community. After medical retirement, he worked as a cyber and threat intelligence security researcher at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory. And now Chris is the CEO of Teamworks Security, where he combines his passion for technology and leadership to help organizations bridge communication gaps in IT and cyber operations for the DoD and other IC agencies. Chris is also a former lecturer at the Johns Hopkins University Department of Engineering and adjunct instructor in the Advanced Cyber Intelligence grad program at the University of South Florida. A Texas native, legendary skier, Army Ranger, and also the author of The Veteran Entrepreneur, My Journey from NCO to CEO. Man, Chris, I'm losing my breath trying to read that intro. It's good. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you, Fred. It's good seeing you again.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have you here, and we got a lot to talk about. Let's just start off with you're obviously like well established in GovCon with your products and cybersecurity. Like how is this the change in the administration affecting you?
So there's a lot of uncertainty, right? Every administration has its goals and objectives, its vision. With that perceived change comes a certain level of uncertainty. So there's that. We've started business. We've been in business for 8 years. So going back, first Trump administration, Biden administration, and now Trump again. I'm excited. I think that there's going to be continued and renewed and even new focuses on, what our technology does is it helps defend critical infrastructure, not only here in the United States, but, with our partners and allies abroad. Very profound statement, right? And how technology can help not only the DoD, but the federal government. And as you know, critical infrastructure is also owned primarily by private industry. So how do we do that? That's what our tech does. We are defense tech company, and our responsibility to not only building working, scalable, advanced capabilities for our customers, but, to also use my almost 30 years of experience in these industries to help protect and defend the United States and our allies. So I like that. New and renewed interest in doing that at even greater scale, I think, with the current administration. So super excited about that. Obviously, with all the uncertainty of things that are going on, change is not easy for everyone. But we've been doing this for 8 years. But that is by no means a recipe for success. It's, building a company, running a company, creating expectations, working with people, setting their expectations, helping them grow. It's all of that. It's being very much in the military again. That's the part of being an entrepreneur I absolutely love.
So I've heard of just the more of the reliance in small business for this administration and incorporation and just collaboration, like more so from other sources, other people that I speak to. And I think it is going to be an exciting time. Right now, it's kind of let the dust settle a little bit,
Yeah.
but there's going to be a tremendous amount of opportunity. And businesses like yourself, um, like Teamworks, you guys are right in the sweet spot right, of what you can offer. So tell us what you guys do, like, and the inspiration behind the starting this business, please.
When I got out of the military, I went to work for, you mentioned it earlier, the Applied Physics Lab. It's a national research center here in the United States. It's the largest university-affiliated Johns Hopkins University. And, for the rest of my career, I wanted to teach. You mentioned that. That's what I wanted to do. I was teaching at 2 different programs. I absolutely loved that. I taught a lot while I was in the Army. Absolutely loved it then. But I'm also an engineer and I like to build. And one of the things that we looked at, one of the challenges that we have in this country, even going back, 12, 13, 14 years ago, was the defense of and the protection of, our nation's, our country's most critical industries, power, water, transportation, aviation, industries that are critical not only to our way of life, but, our democracy, our country, and those partners and allies who depend on us, our expertise, our technologies. And I had, one of these number of opportunities to contribute to that, right? It was my charter as not only a military veteran, but as an engineer working in national research to say, hey, I think I could create a solution, a product, if you will, that can help our country, our government, our private industries work more closely together, because we all tend to build, create, do things in silos, right? It's not an old concept. We tend to not work very well with each other, government, private industry, and others. And, today's asymmetric threats or advanced threats in this more of the cybersecurity space, they don't look at it that way. They don't look at the individual silos. They look at targets, and they look at targets of opportunity, right? Cyber has no boundaries, if you think about that. But yet, look at what happened in Guam, with Volt Typhoon, right? You had a nation state affect Guam's critical infrastructure industry, operational technology industry. And my big question today, I was just down in Norfolk last week talking about this with the Navy, and the big question, then and today is, who's responsible for that? Is it because Guam, it's a territory, right? But it also has big Navy, right? It has Anderson Air Force Base there as well, and it has, bits and pieces of the Army and DISA. But you also have the National Guard and private industry and the tourism industry and its proximity to not only continental United States, Hawaii, but, Japan and others. Who's responsible for that? Was it DHS? Was it FBI or DOD or Guam? And the answer is everybody. Again, cybersecurity or your people who come in, cyber bad guys, they don't have boundaries like we typically have boundaries. And when this nation state did what they did in Volt Typhoon, that is just another reminder of how vulnerable and how much better we can be. So we built technology to help seamlessly orchestrate efforts across multiple industries, titles and authorities, law enforcement.
Sorry, Volt Typhoon. You've mentioned it twice. I don't know what that is. What is
Volt Typhoon was an attack by China against Guam's critical infrastructure that affected the Navy and a bunch of industries in Guam. Right? It was well published. You Google it, you're going to get 1 million hits. It was a wake-up call of how this nation state was so embedded in our infrastructure in Guam that affected, again, DOD, Guam, private industry, Air Force, DOD at large, federal government. It was a wake-up call to say, hey, bad guys are in the wire. We need to do something about this. How do we, one, figure out how to kick them out, how to better defend so they don't come back in, and 3, who's responsible for all of that? So Volt Typhoon is a big deal. There's been a number of examples of other Volt Typhoon types of attacks against the United States and our allies.
Um, well, thank you for that. I mean, I can see the inspiration of that, right? Of why this makes you passionate about what you do. Like but you were a trigger puller. You were a knuckle dragger in the 75th, and working with 10th Special Forces. Like? How did you learn or get exposed to this in the first place? Where you're like, you know what, I can really make a difference here.
When I was in, it used to be Fort Benning, Georgia, a
Fort
gentleman at the
Warren now.
time named
Yeah.
Stan McChrystal, he was an '06, Army colonel. He was in charge of the Ranger Regiment. And in the mid 90s, he came into command, and, his vision was to, again, this is the mid 90s,
Mm.
was to modernize the SOF industry, the SOF special operations community, starting with the Ranger Regiment. And back then, what did that mean? We didn't have cell phones in the mid 90s.
Mm.
We didn't have computer systems and networks in organizations. If when you wanted to have a conversation, you either picked up the phone or you walked to somebody's office to have a conversation. And his scenario was very simple. When you have the special operations community come together, so you have the different services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and other, you have, JSOC, you have SOCOM, Joint Communications Unit under JSOC, all that stuff. When you're planning an operation, a military operation, you would come together, in one big tent, again, in the mid 90s, and you would plan an operations order, which meant you would have dozens of different organizations across the different military communities coming together with pencil and paper, to figure out who's doing what, who's on my left and who's on my right, who's responsible for this, who is supposed to say that. A big coordination effort was, let's make sure we do things safely, that we're still able to execute the mission, and let's make sure that we can at least understand what success looks like. And we did all of this with pencil and paper. Well, Stan McChrystal's vision was to bring in more automation, to bring in computer networks, to, if I recall, he wanted to get that op order planning from, 10 days down to 2 or 3 days.
Incredible.
Imagine that, right? Everybody coming together, different computer systems, different operating systems, different networking systems, figuring out how to work together so we can plan things more efficiently. And computer networks at that time allowed us to optimize how we did that, to streamline how we communicated. That's what I do today. Our technology helps us as a country and, defensive critical infrastructure do that today. And it was that time in my life that said, hey, how do you go from, ground pounder to systems engineer? I was fortunate to be in an organization where there was a vision for the future of our industry. And I was fortunate to be a part of that, and grateful, because that led to the career that I have today. It helped me think much bigger than, carrying an M4, in 120-pound ruck downrange. So very fortunate.
General McChrystal, he is a brilliant individual.
Yeah.
I mean, a visionary to think like that at that era, right? And to make it a mission to actually make that possible.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Unheard of. I mean,
Yeah.
I was the guy who plugged in sock.mil at Fort Benning. I
Right.
mean, we didn't even, we were just starting to build what we know the internet to be today. It's crazy.
And for him to really just have the foresight that this is feasible, let's get after it. That's awesome, and he's the inspiration of you, of you now. So that's really cool. Do you still keep in touch with him?
I don't as much. I keep in touch with a lot of folks from that time, but I do follow him and I do run into him from time to time. He's here in Alexandria, huge community, supports entrepreneurs and veteran-owned businesses, whatnot. So he's still here. Yeah, he's still very much part of our community.
Very cool. So I know that at your Johns Hopkins time, that's when you found and met your partner for Teamworks.
That's right.
That's what. How did you know this was? All right, this is the person that I need to build a company with.
Laura was my supervisor at APL. In her career, she started out at the National Security Agency at the age of 16. She studied math and computer science. And she was a lifer at APL, somebody who had been there for 16, 17, maybe more by the time I showed up. That's one of those organizations where you can spend 20, 25 years and be part of the most advanced research and application of technologies. And when I showed up, I'm a bit of a dreamer, and once I kind of wrap my head around something I want to do, the APL works with folks like myself and encourages folks like myself, and she was one of them. She said, "Hey, I like that idea. Let me see if I can get you some, internal research dollars to, help you build a prototype, just to demonstrate if it can actually work." So we did that, I think, with like 50 or 60K or something like that. And we worked closely for, several years, and I always appreciated her eye for detail, especially when it comes to numbers and technical details. She's very, very good. One of her strengths is she can communicate very technical concepts to people who aren't technical, which is, a superpower in many regards in our industry. And she's really good with people, where I'm that hard charger. I like to build things like a fire team, and she really complements my leadership style with things that I'm not so good at, and things that we're just a complement in terms of how we work.
But you guys shared a vision that, hey, this is a company, this is a product that you guys can build.
It took us a while. We were potentially talking about leaving a once-in-a-lifetime career working with such a great organization. I mean, who does that? Right? Do I want to leave, working a comfortable 40 hours a week to going to work, for 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week, and the uncertainty of the future? This is not Silicon Valley, where we have a lot of dreamers like that. It's the National Capital Region, where entrepreneurship is not so prevalent.
Yeah. Well, that takes a lot of just cojones, right? And also a little bit of luck. Timing, I'm sure, was also a very big factor. And I'm curious here. So now you and Laura, I mean, you guys are still working together.
Yeah.
And you guys have decided. When was the first time you said? What was like the first key hire that you guys made? You guys are two visionaries, and you guys were had different strengths that rounded each other out. What was that first key hire that really changed the trajectory of the business?
We hired a much better engineer than myself. The early engineer we had, Steven, rock solid engineer. But to help continue building the vision was, Tony Contafio, Naval Academy grad, still in the reserves, is on reserve duty as we speak. You look for, one, we really had to learn how to start a business and then build a business and scale a business, right? I mean, building technology, building solutions is kind of easy compared to trying to run a business. And I can look back after 8 years and say the first key hire, to answer your question, was somebody who can not only understand my vision, but to help me execute that vision at to use the tactical and operational levels of the organization. Translating that to folks who are very, engineers who are very hyper focused in, key things
Mm-hmm.
that, tend not to pay attention to the big picture. You need translators like that. So I would say, Tony and several others, translators of what we do and especially why we do it,
Mm.
super important. I think it's harder to find those folks than it is to find, good engineers, data scientists, and more technical folks. You need translators to help translate things.
Yeah, to make laymen like me understand or have a clue of what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
How did you find Tony?
Um, you know, so in the early days, you're looking at the guy who I was the recruiter, I was the engineer, I was the bookkeeper, running the business, all that sales guy. I'm still
Mm.
the sales guy. One of the ways that I use LinkedIn a lot, right? I
Mm-hmm.
keep close hold. I pay attention to the communities that I'm part
Mm-hmm.
of. I look for folks who are on the move, career-wise, looking for challenges, and I've used LinkedIn extensively to
Sure.
recruit. I think I found Tony that way. I noticed that he was exiting active duty and wanted to go into the reserves for his last, I don't know, 5-6 years,
Mm-hmm.
um, and just a chance conversation, with him on LinkedIn. He was actually interviewing with Amazon at the time.
Mm.
And then I basically had a conversation with him promising him, there's tremendous amount of uncertainty. We don't know what the hell we're doing, and we need some folks who can help us. So, he rolled the dice and joined us soon thereafter, and he's been with us ever since.
It kind of reminds me of that advertisement that was put out, like tough work, no pay, but upon success,
Yeah, high
great
chance
glory,
for, to get dead real
failure.
fast and,
Yeah,
apply here kind of thing. I know what you're
yeah.
talking about. Yeah,
Well, so as a business owner listening potentially, or a business leader, veteran with looking to start a business, that first like critical hire, or maybe that second critical hire, it's super important, right?
yeah.
So I mean, there's some risk, there's some gamble. I'm curious, you met Tony on LinkedIn. How did you vet him to say, you know what, this guy is going to be a fit, or this guy is a performer?
Um, you have your gut,
Hmm.
I mean, now we work with, a different program that helps us better understand the people analytics behind that. You know all about that.
Mm.
In the early days, and I still consider, in some parts we're still in our early days, but you go by your gut. You go by how well your conversation went, how well you got along. And a lot of that still holds true today. I don't always get it right. I still get it wrong. And
Me too.
it's just one of those things. You just have to do trial and error and
Yeah.
figure out what works and be even more clear in your communication and expectations. And, that's always a work in progress. And there's just a number of factors. I think when we first talked, we just hit it off and had a great conversation. And the folks that were in the company, I think maybe we were 4 or 5 people, they got along extremely well with them, and they still do to this day.
Mm.
So, we go by gut, and we still do that today.
Well, let me just caveat though, it's not just gut, because you do have data driven
Yep.
process, right? You do use the predictive index or culture index and all of those behavioral assessments to to assist you in
Yeah.
decision making. So it's gut, but also data driven. Can you walk us through that process that you have at Teamworks?
Yeah. So, we use Culture Index, and the way that we use, and there's a number of ways to use, people analytic capabilities. I like Culture Index because it helps me and us see things that maybe we're not seeing. It helps us understand, how well a person's personality will fit into and onto a team. Again, there's different ways to look at it. You can use Culture Index to say, hey, I want the best fit for these types of missions or these types of departments and whatnot. We use it to say what's the best personality, professional, personal fit to the team that they're going to be joining. And for us, it helps us remove some of the guessing game, right? It helps us improve our accuracy with, using our gut and, going through a conversation 2 or 3. And I like that because when you start looking at a person and who they are and their personality, and you start to understand, in this case, Culture Index's personalities, it's easy. It's getting easier and easier to see which personalities fit what personalities, right? And we have gotten that wrong on a couple of occasions, right? We've hired personalities that were good in a certain area, but not good for the team that they were coming to join, and that's the problem.
That's huge.
So. Yeah, it's anything that gives me any kind of insight I don't want to get away from trusting my gut, but to give me more data.
Yeah.
And to maybe see things that I'm not seeing, just to make sure, because you want to hire once and you want to try to get it right as often as possible, and create a more efficient hiring and building a career process. So,
well, I like the fact that you're an engineer, Chris, and you have. You're process driven and you work with data. So I'm curious here if you can share with us, when do you use Culture Index, right? And how many rounds do you typically go? What is that like process that I'm sure it's consistent, it's replicable for you each time, so you can try to remove bias, but excuse me. Yeah. What does that look like for you? Especially with a tool like a behavioral tool.
So when we announce positions, we include a link to Culture Index, and we only when we look at a position, we say, okay, these are the different personalities that we think will fit. So when people apply to that, if they take the test, we tend to interview those that we believe will fit based on the personalities that we're looking for, right? Because the team that we're hiring for will consist of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different personalities. Adding one personality should be a fit, because if it's not, it could disrupt the whole team. So it's a pretty simple process. You take the test, that comes along with the application, and if you're a fit, personality-wise through Culture Index, we will set up an interview. In some cases, people aren't a fit, and you'd be surprised. A lot of cases, people won't even do the survey. We don't pay attention to those, right? Again, we're just trying to improve our odds to getting the hiring of the right person for the right position, the first or second time out.
And do you then just do like a technical interview followed by like a culture interview followed by like a panel interview, that kind of deal?
Yeah, we run folks through a minimum of 2 different, not only the hiring manager, but another person in the company will set up an interview to get their assessment, to get their observations and opinions. Sometimes we'll do a third, depending on if it's a very technical position. So, a minimum of 2, usually 3 different interviews, just for us to really, are we seeing everything? Did we miss something? Is Culture Index, this personality, even the right fit, the right assessment that we're thinking of? So all of these things, we've gotten this down to a science, a process, an easy to follow process, and super efficient. And I would say because of Culture Index and its implementation, it's improved our accuracy by 60-70%.
Awesome.
At least.
Do you have your team rate each individual based on like characteristics or?
No, we kind of draw up. This is the type of personality that we think will fit the personalities within a team. We look for that person, and then we get we go through the interviews, and we just sit down, one at a time, right? We don't want everybody in the same room, kind of thing. And we just ask simple questions. What do you think? This is what I was looking for. What were some of the key strengths and areas? Your observations, that type of thing. It's a very simple conversation,
Sure.
and it lasts 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, so you just it's a process, but it's also very subjective to the interviewer, and
Yep.
you're looking for harmony, right? You're looking for harmony.
I'm looking for streamlining and optimizing team performance and accuracy and all that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. When have you experienced culture index to be wrong,
Well,
or behavioral assessments in general, right?
um, I don't recall that we've actually said culture index was flat out wrong. I have found that our interpretation of culture index's recommendations were off.
Hmm.
We had hired someone, super fantastic person, comes with a lot of strengths, and we believed those not only experiences but strengths and others would benefit the team. And
It was a bias.
it was a huge bias.
Mhm.
We didn't listen. And super great between myself and that person, but between that person and the rest of the team was not a good fit.
Hmm.
Right. And it just wasn't an overall good fit. So it was us not listening. And then, there were some lessons learned there. If somebody comes in and says, I don't believe in all these personality traits and I didn't take the test. Well, we don't even interview those people. We won't even return. We'll send that person a thank you email, and that's pretty much it. We won't. It's about efficiency. We won't entertain a conversation.
We mentioned bias a little bit. Can you tell us what a bias is? Obviously, something that you have, and there's different types of biases, cognitive biases, but
Yeah.
one is the confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us what that is and how business leaders should try to avoid?
I'll tell you one. I have this fancy title, right? I'm the top guy in the company, and there has been times where I've overridden the recommendations of these processes, and I believe that this person that I would like to bring in would be a benefit to the entire company, and that's wrong. You set up a process. You stick to the process, and if the process continues to improve how you do things by 60, 70% or more, you stick with it. The biases of me coming in and thinking that I know more about everybody's interpretation or even culture index is absolutely wrong.
What do you? I mean, don't you just throw away the data that doesn't make sense? Just throw that result away, right?
You want to, and then is that about an ego, or is that really about for the betterment of your team,
Right.
And I've been subject to, hey, that's an ego-driven kind of decision, and things like culture index really helps me understand myself. Where I'm coming from is it helps me pay attention to the things that I may not always be paying attention to, my blind spots, if you will. And I absolutely love that, because we all have them. You mentioned biases and all these. We all have blind spots. And I think for the, what's best for the team and what's best for the company is to understand and admit you have blind spots, but create a system that helps you see, understand, and deal with those blind spots.
Sure.
And try to improve. And, that's what we simply try to do.
I tell people, I tell clients, hiring is only that first half. The act of recruiting, and interviewing, vetting, it's only that first half of the equation to build a successful team or an A team. The other is there's others. It's the onboarding piece. It's the setting expectation
Yeah.
piece. It's the continuous feedback and making sure that there's alignment. It's setting goals, in the interim or milestones for performance. Like how do you think about that for your company?
It's a very difficult thing. It's a very difficult process to juggle. It's no less important than anything else, right? There is an excuse that you're a startup and everything you just said doesn't matter, right? It's about the hustle and working as a team to get stuff done.
Mm.
But this is not Silicon Valley, right? Where you have a lot of folks who don't pay attention to that stuff. They just want to get in, earn a bunch of money, and hustle and kick butt. And well, it's a little different in this market, and it's a little different in this part of the industry, in this part of the world.
You don't have
So
unlimited money, right? You don't have
yeah,
unlimited backers, right?
you have to bring in a good team that can help you do that better. Of course, when people come in here and be part of our team, you want to give them more than just hope that we'll succeed and they'll have a successful career, right? You want to be able to provide building blocks, and you want to be able to provide direction and conversation and access to mentors here within the company, and even encourage mentorship outside of the company. It's really hard to be a startup in a small business and do all of that. And from day one, we really wanted to be a company that was able to bring in exceptional employees, exceptional teammates, and help them build their careers here. Still super exciting, still very hard, and again, I don't always get that right. But we continue to try.
Yeah. So if we were to kind of again zoom in a little bit and say, how does a engineer like yourself or team of engineers, how do you think about that process? Who actually goes and says and does that first onboarding for you guys, and what does that usually consist of?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different folks who come in on board, of course, from the HR side, initial onboarding, and we not pre-rehearse, but we know who the folks that will be welcoming that person into and onto their teams from day one. We come up with, it's a 1 to 2 week period generally to get them acclimated and get all the forms and everything they need to do and get integrated into the team. We usually give about, a week to 2 weeks to do that. And it's very fluid. We look for those folks who are naturally able to and highly capable of hitting the ground running. Because we are still a small business and considered a startup, you got to be able to keep up, kind of thing. We do bring in interns and others into the company, which I absolutely love. A little bit of different focus there, but from onboarding to this is what success looks like, not only from an engineering perspective, but from a company perspective and from an industry perspective. We help. One of the things that we help our new folks do is really understand where they're at in each. Success of the company means we're building a product that people want to use. We're challenging the status quo. Our technology can scale, that kind of stuff. And you should know what all of that means coming in here, and you'll be paired with those people who knows what it means. And we do that and then we start the very basic, team building exercise. It's like building a fire team.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really where I get the concepts, really, is from my military days.
That's right. I've actually spoken to several people that just try to keep it simple, stupid, and
yeah,
follow the org structure of your infantry platoon, right?
Yep. Fire team, squad,
Yep.
platoon. That it's very simple when when I put things in those terms.
So as a startup, and the CEO, Chris, I'm sure you obviously think a lot about hiring, think a lot about building your team. Where do you spend time to intentionally shape the culture of your company?
I read something the other day about a CEO of a big pharma company, and he'd been a CEO for like 25 years, and he does this thing called the walk around. It's easy to do with a small team. Much like in the military, you spend time with folks, and the way that we do that is we bring in lunch on Mondays and Tuesdays. So we can spend time with each other here. in the office. We do have somewhat of a remote workforce, so we try to bring them in as often as possible from out of town. We do, monthly luncheons where we'll do some sort of puzzle game as a company kind of thing. 4th of July parties, holiday parties, celebrate birthdays, career milestone achievements, those types of things. We try to keep ourselves as socially interactive as if we're all sitting next to each other on a daily basis. And we do that through a series of platforms like Slack, like our own platform that we built, and other, whether it's Zoom or Teams or other, we take into account all of that. The idea is team building. And the way we do that is through social interaction and having conversations and challenging ourselves on a professional level. Can we do this? Should we do this? Why or why not? Those types of things, to be very candid and open and black and white, if you will.
Connectivity, just more interaction, right?
Yeah.
Because most of you guys are remote. Well, that's good that you have all of those programs. As the CEO, I assume, do you do you initiate those, or do you delegate that to your HR?
I don't know if that's something you can delegate, but I probably try. But a lot of our leadership team is like that. We're very, who do you hire? Do you hire the 05 sitting in the back office? You hire the the 03 who's in charge of the platoon to do a social thing. So those are the types of folks we like to hire. Is somebody who's a soldier. You know what I mean? Somebody who, again, this is where the culture analysis, the personality fit comes into play. We know the types of personalities that fit the teams that we have here. And there are some personalities that don't like to be social, that like to sit in a corner and don't like to be bothered. And I got to tell you, we don't work well with those types of personalities.
That 05 in the back office, come on. Give him a chance.
You kind of lose sight of, what's real, and from time to time, you'll find folks who, forget what it's like to be a PL. You know what I mean?
Or just require some transition, right? To get
a little bit. Yeah,
for sure. Demilitarization.
Tony, as I mentioned, he's an 05 right now. And, so, I poke fun of him from time to time, but he is in his heart a soldier, even for a Navy guy.
Yeah, cool. Talking about again, just about what you've seen other companies do wrong when building a team. Like, what are some red flags that you recommend people to stay away from when trying to hire and build teams?
I sit here in Columbia, Maryland, and the primary or dominant industry is GovCon industry, which is more professional services based types of business models. And, there is a tendency, not all the businesses do this, but there is a tendency to hire, for somebody's resume and for certifications or a clearance, a security clearance to work on that job, work in that position. And I think that a lot of people get that wrong, right? Because they're not hiring, not everybody, but sometimes there's a tendency to not hire for team fit, personality fit, culture fit, customer fit. It's, you had the right resume with the right clearance and you're a butt who needs to be in a seat and I'm going to hire you. I think that model still happens, and I think it's not healthy for our industry. But again, Teamwork Security is modeled after, a company like you'd find in Silicon Valley. So those things are super important to us. AJ Jernigan, right? Stand-up guy, retired Air Force. We never hold that against him, but he has built a super successful GovCon business. And Marley, same thing, they look at and use culture index, and they hire for the best fit for a team or for a mission or for the group and even for the organization. I think that's the way it should be. So, Do we all do that? No, because it's cheaper to say you fit the salary range, you've got the proper clearance. I don't care about anything else. I'm going to hire you. That's not good for the customer. And that's not good for the mission. So people like AJ and people like Marley, spot on. They do it well every single time.
And you, right? I mean, it's improved 60 to 70% of your success, which is incredible. So it is about um, leadership. It's about culture, and for folks that for folks that tend to just read that resume, they fall in love with the candidate because of that, right? And then hence confirmation bias and like everything that I hear, I want to make sure that I'm confirming that you're the right guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, just that it's just that loophole or not that loophole, that rat hole you can go into
Mm.
and just never get out of. Um, I have one more question about hiring and team building, and then I have something about technical. But do you have any? If you don't, that's cool. We've talked a lot about it. Any kind of secret sauce for you? You know, a non-traditional hiring strategy, whether it's just cultivating relationships for a long time with potential hires, or or just vetting, references or anything like that that you may use. That's a non-traditional kind of Chris Anthony deal.
Uh, lean on my team here. You know,
Yeah.
non-traditionally as a CEO, you fall within a system, but occasionally the team will approach, myself or us and say, hey, we're seeing something that, either Culture Index isn't picking up on or I'm not paying attention to. And to your question, yeah, I'm not supposed to be the guy who knows everything, even though sometimes you're supposed to be the guy who knows everything.
Mm.
But to be vulnerable, untraditionally, uncomfortably being vulnerable allows me understanding that I have that and can do that and should do that, keeps me leaning on my team and keeps it very team centered, team focused. We're called Teamwork Security for one of those reasons right there. It's not always about me. It's not always about Laura. It could be, one of our senior cybersecurity guys, gals, they're saying, hey, pay attention because you're not. Listen to what I'm saying because you're not.
Mm.
And being okay to say that out loud.
Mm.
What, infantry commander wants to hear that from, a team leader? Well, in the special operations community, you can do that. Sometimes in other parts of the military, you can't do that. It's frowned upon. And I've never been a fan of that.
Mm.
You should be able to question your leadership with respect. You should be able to ask questions, again, with respect. If you're a trigger puller and you're going in there with a team and, somebody is an officer and somebody is enlisted and you don't have that kind of rapport and relationship, man, that's when things can go south quickly.
Yeah, it's a complete tangent, but I feel like there's a lot of Asian countries and just outside because US the mentality is different. Everyone has a voice and everyone's opinions. Like in other countries, it's the guy on the top, right? And that's the
Yeah.
only thing that matters. And that's I see a lot of downfall. Of course, they're very successful companies, but there are also downfalls to that kind of hierarchical, just siloed. And if and as a veteran entrepreneur, that could be a trap we fall into,
Yeah.
right? And I
Yep.
mean, I'm guilty of it as well. It's like, all right, we're gonna all go left. So and that is the wrong answer. So thanks for that. Thanks for the sharing the vulnerability piece. One last thing. Just I'm curious, technical. Your outlook on the market with the advancement of AI, with like the tremendous advancement of AI, not to say the least, and your focus on cyber and this administration's focus on just making our country stronger. Um, I'm curious, where do you see like the biggest threats for us?
Well, the unknown, right, is always the biggest threat, and AI is this huge, hole of the unknown. Is it A game changer, yes. Can it continue being a game changer? Yes. AI is going to be part of our future, whether we like it or not.
Hmm.
Can't do everything right now, but there's a lot of promises of what it will be able to do. So, in that in itself, and that uncertainty, could be that, right? But I look at it from, in engineering from a technical perspective. I like, our ability to innovate in and around AI. Again, it can't do everything, right? We use it for some very specific things to, again, optimize and streamline the defense of critical infrastructure. And I'd like to continue making investments, our own investments into advancing those types of technologies. And is it scary? Absolutely, because nobody knows what it's going to do, what it's going to look like. We think we do, and we can make some educated guesses. So that in itself, for any country, any person, any industry, is scary.
Yeah, tremendously. The unknown, but there's so much that we don't know. And what is your kind of solution to that unknown
Research,
scare?
R&D.
Mm.
The the SecDef recently wrote something or put something out that the DoD and the government oftentimes funds research and development of technologies, and I've always believed, and I agree with him. I don't think these big billion-dollar corporations should be doing R&D. These systems integrators, I think they should be making products. I think they should be making healthy investments on the back end in R&D, but leveraging, our national research organizations like APL. Small businesses like us, should be taking in money from venture capital and other investors and investing that into the advancement of our industry and our technologies.
Oh, that's an interesting viewpoint. That is, yeah, it makes
Because
sense.
the whole point is to put, to use a term from our industry, more lead on target faster, more efficiently, at a cost benefit to where we can, address those threats as quickly as possible and move on, not really dwell on it. And I think some of the changes that the administration is doing with the DoD government contracting are super positive. Make us be more efficient. Why should this is a real world thing? Why should the government pay $250 million on something that already exists because that big government contractor convinced the government that that's what they should do? Well, they spent $250 million on technology that you can go out and buy for $1,500 a month. $250 million.
It's called
Freddie,
ChatGPT.
this is happening every single day, and it pisses me off. Whereas you got all these small companies, these highly innovative companies. Alex Karp from Palantir. Man, that dude is spot on. Technology and defense tech industry should be at the service of, our country, at the people of this country, and our allies and our partners and our industries. And R&D has its place, but rapid innovation, rapid development, rapid capabilities is what companies like us should be focused on, and that's what Teamwork Security has been investing in. Yeah, so I'm super excited.
Really cool to hear that. Thank you so much, Chris. Obviously, we're gonna put your LinkedIn and make sure people can find you and Teamworks. Anything else that I should have asked you that I didn't? We covered a lot of different topics. Really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate what you're doing, right? Exposing, the military entrepreneur, the military spouse entrepreneur, super important. Those industries, I think you and I, for the most part, serve primarily the same industry, defense tech, GovCon spaces. I think our government, our country could be better, should be better. And I look at that lens through a very entrepreneurial, technical lens, right? Innovation lens. I like that. I like being nimble. The things that our country has been able to do from time to time over the last 100 years is sometimes we need to figure out how to get back to that prosperity and to those times of innovation. So reach out and talk to companies like that. There's, a lot of them. And I think that's a topic that we all need to listen to. What is the future of not only our country, but our industries, but for ourselves? Who should we be? What should this country be for our kids? You've got little ones, I've got little ones. How do we build that today? And I can tell you, eliminating bureaucracy and red tape is a good start.
Transparency. Right.
I love what you're doing. I'd like to continue supporting, doing what you're doing. And man, super excited to be part of this.
Chris, you've always been a great friend, just a advocate. I appreciate it. I really do. Mentor with your experiences. So truly, truly appreciate it. Let's keep it going. And for everyone else listening, thank you for tuning in. And now you can go build your A team. Thanks.